The royal family is facing a scandal like never before, and this time, it's Camilla's own son at the center of it. Shocking reports confirm that Tom Parker Bowles was caught bullying King Charles during a private royal fundraiser, making cruel and condescending remarks that left the monarch visibly shaken. But he wasn't the only one facing consequences. Prince William, furious and protective, took the extraordinary step of stripping Tom of a key royal title, sending a message: the palace will not tolerate disloyalty. What exactly happened behind those garden gates at Berkhall? And why has William finally had enough? It was meant to be an elegant, low-profile evening, a summer fundraiser hosted by King Charles at Berkhall, his secluded Highland estate. The guest list included international diplomats, conservation donors, and a handful of family members. There was music, fine wine, and a light Scottish breeze stirring the ivy along the marquee. But just past 8:30 p.m., the atmosphere changed. Tom Parker Bowles, seated near the western garden path, was engaged in a casual conversation with several guests when his tone shifted. According to multiple accounts, he made a remark that silenced the surrounding laughter. "He still thinks he's in charge," he said with a glance toward the king. "At this point, they're just letting him play monarch." Some guests chuckled awkwardly, others turned away. But Tom continued. "The transition already happened," he added. "William's the leader now. Charles is ceremonial." The words weren't whispered. They were delivered with enough volume to carry across the open-air reception. Several attendees noted the moment King Charles approached the group moments later, perhaps to greet guests or thank supporters, only to pause mid-step. One aide recalled His Majesty turning sharply and walking away, saying nothing. He did not return. By 9:45 p.m., the king had quietly retired to the private wing of the estate. Aides were instructed to continue the event without his participation. His planned toast was canceled, replaced with a brief thank you from a palace aide. The remainder of the evening went on, though many noted a shift in tone. One guest described the mood as polished but suddenly distant. What was meant to be a quiet evening in the Highlands ended in silence and suspicion. And behind those hedges at Berkhall, the seeds of a royal reckoning had just been planted. While the fundraiser at Berkhall had ended on a quiet note, the emotional damage left behind was anything but subtle. What Tom Parker Bowles said that night wasn't simply inappropriate, it was, in the words of one royal staffer, the kind of thing that can't be unsaid. Several guests, including foreign dignitaries and senior cultural advisors, had heard Tom's remarks in full. According to one attendee, the tone was confident, dismissive, and far from humorous. He reportedly described the king as a ceremonial figure and claimed Charles doesn't run anything, he just signs where they point. One aide stationed nearby later recalled, "He said it like he was stating a fact, not sharing an opinion." But it was the final line, delivered over a glass of port, that struck a deeper blow. "William's the real king now. Charles just wears the robe." Three separate guests confirmed that King Charles was within earshot when that remark was made. As he approached the cluster of guests, a staff member saw him slow down, hesitate, then turn away without a word. The king nodded to his valet and exited the gathering quietly. According to sources within the palace, that was the last anyone saw of him that night. Back inside the estate, he declined his customary evening tea. His personal secretary canceled the remaining briefing papers, and staff were instructed not to disturb him. By 10:15 p.m., a note was sent to the event coordinator. "His Majesty is retiring early. Guests may be thanked on his behalf." In the debriefing that followed among royal aides, the reaction was serious. One member of staff reportedly said, "It wasn't just disrespectful, it was institutional, like mocking the uniform, not just the man." The next morning, while the world remained unaware, palace aides were already compiling summaries, transcripts, and eyewitness statements. They understood this was more than social misjudgment. It wasn't an outsider attacking the crown, it was someone with access to the inside. And the person hurt most wasn't just the monarch, it was a father who had given everything to a role, only to be dismissed by someone meant to stand beside him. The morning after the Berkhall fundraiser, King Charles carried on as if nothing had happened. He took his usual early walk through the gardens, reviewed briefing documents, and met quietly with a sustainability advisor over tea. But those closest to him knew the difference. The king wasn't composed, he was distant, formal, measured in a way that signaled hurt more than calm. "He withdrew into duty," said one aide. "That's what he does when something cuts deeply." While the king chose silence, his son did not. Prince William received the internal summary just after 9 a.m. on July 20th. Inside were 3 pages of compiled witness statements, security notes, and a detailed transcript of Tom Parker Bowles' remarks. The file had been hand-delivered with a red priority seal. William reportedly read it once, then again. His expression didn't change, but staff in the room said the silence grew heavy. "He said this about my father?" William asked aloud. Those words marked a shift, not just from surprise to anger, but from son to sovereign in waiting. By midday, 2 of William's scheduled public appearances were quietly canceled. No reason given. Behind palace doors, a private meeting was called with his legal and administrative advisors. Witnesses described William's demeanor as calm, cold, and unlike anything they'd seen before. Later that evening, he spoke with his private secretary. His tone was deliberate. "My father has carried this crown longer than most people have carried jobs. He doesn't deserve mockery, especially not from family." What struck William hardest wasn't just the insult, it was the entitlement behind it. Tom Parker Bowles hadn't slipped up in frustration. He had spoken openly, intentionally, in front of guests, with no concern for consequence. This wasn't a moment of misplaced humor. It was an erosion of respect, and not for a man, but for the monarchy itself. That night, William made his decision. There would be no warnings, no second chances. The monarchy would be defended, even if it meant drawing a line in his own family. Within hours of the Burke Hall incident, the palace had already begun documenting what had happened. It started with an internal memo filed at 11:45 p.m. on July 19th, compiled by a senior communications officer. Included were statements from 4 guests, 2 diplomats, a royal aide, and a palace footman, all of whom had witnessed Tom Parker Bowles' remarks. Their accounts were nearly identical. Tom had allegedly referred to the king as a ceremonial figure, joked about Charles being allowed to play monarch, and dismissed him as just the robe, not the ruler. The memo noted that Tom's tone wasn't joking, but condescending. According to one diplomat, he didn't lower his voice. He said it like it was fact. A second report came shortly after midnight, this time from palace security. It detailed King Charles's physical reaction. He had approached the group, paused as if hearing something unexpected, and turned away. Moments later, he left the reception without explanation. The security report was tagged with a reputational sensitivity warning, typically reserved for incidents involving foreign guests or public exposure. By morning, both documents were merged into a single internal file. Incident 0417, Burke Hall Engagement, Witness Summary and Observations. It was classified confidential and hand-delivered to Kensington Palace, along with a short note attached. Internal breach, risk to royal image, direct attention required. The final paragraph of the summary didn't mince words. Language used against His Majesty was derisive, inappropriate, and made within audible range of official guests. Impact, reputational vulnerability, immediate internal response advised. That line was reportedly underlined in red. When Prince William read the file the next morning, his reaction wasn't immediate anger. It was a prolonged, eerie silence. Because now the palace had more than rumors. It had a paper trail. And for William, that made one thing certain. This was no longer just a family embarrassment, it was a matter of monarchy. To outsiders, Tom Parker Bowles' remarks at Burke Hall may have sounded like a slip, sharp and inappropriate, but isolated. Inside the palace, however, many knew better. This wasn't the first time Tom had made light of his stepfather, and it wasn't the first time Camilla's inner circle had allowed disrespect to ripple through the family. According to aides who've served under both King Charles and Prince William, there had always been a quiet tension between Camilla's household and the senior branch of the monarchy. While cordial in public, in private, there were remarks, small jabs, lingering glances, and jokes that landed just a little too hard. A former staffer recalled a moment in 2019 during a state dinner at Windsor when Tom was overheard telling a guest, "The real transfer of powers already happened. My mum keeps things smiling. William runs the show." At the time, the comment was brushed off, but in retrospect, it wasn't an anomaly. It was part of a pattern. One longtime palace insider described it this way: "There's always been this unspoken belief, especially from Tom, that Charles is a placeholder, that the crown was meant for William and Charles is just in the way." Even Camilla wasn't immune from the same undercurrent. In private settings, she's been known to make casual remarks about Charles's long speeches or forgetfulness during engagements. One former equerry recalled her calling him my wandering philosopher, after a particularly detailed conservation address. These weren't public insults, but they added up. And Tom, unbound by royal titles but emboldened by family proximity, spoke more freely than anyone else could. Over the years, his remarks about Charles grew more pointed, especially at informal events where protocol felt optional and alcohol flowed freely. What happened at Birkhall wasn't a break from character. It was a culmination. For Prince William, the pattern had become impossible to ignore. His father, who had waited decades to wear the crown with dignity, was now being diminished not by critics or tabloids, but by someone seated at the family table. And if that pattern wasn't stopped now, it would only grow bolder. The insult at Birkhall may have been public, but the disrespect had been private for far too long. By the afternoon of July 21st, Prince William had made his decision. There would be no warnings, no quiet back-channel conversations. The monarchy, he believed, had reached a line, and Tom Parker Bowles had crossed it. At Kensington Palace, William called a closed-door meeting with his most senior advisors, his private secretary, legal counsel, and 2 senior members of the royal household. The session lasted less than an hour, but what came out of it would change the dynamic between royal branches for good. Without hesitation, William instructed that Tom be stripped of his honorary royal title, his patronage of the British Culinary Guild, a ceremonial role granted in 2012 to recognize his contributions to British food culture. The move was both symbolic and strategic. While the patronage carried no formal power, it gave Tom royal visibility, allowed him to represent the crown at cultural events, and tied his personal brand to the monarchy's reputation. That tie, William believed, was no longer deserved. "You don't mock the crown from within and expect to wear its colors," he told his advisors. The revocation required no public statement. By 2 p.m. the next day, the Guild was notified. A single line delivered the message: Mr. Parker Bowles will no longer serve in a representative capacity under the royal household. Internally, the decision was referred to as an accountability directive, not personal, but principled. Still, those closest to William knew it was deeply personal too. "It wasn't about revenge," said one aide. "It was about respect." And William believed the institution must defend itself, even from insiders. The first domino had fallen, quietly, decisively. And the message across the royal circle was clear: titles are earned by service, not inherited by association. As news of Tom Parker Bowles' title removal quietly circulated through palace corridors, one question lingered: how would Queen Camilla respond? Privately briefed on William's decision the morning of July 22nd, Camilla was said to be visibly unsettled, but not surprised. According to 2 aides, she immediately dismissed the action as an overreaction. "It was just Tom being Tom," she reportedly told her private staff. "He's blunt, but harmless." The lack of remorse stunned those within Kensington Palace. When William requested a brief phone call to inform her personally, sources say the exchange was civil but strained. William reiterated why action had been necessary, citing the damage to the king's dignity and the public setting in which it occurred. Camilla, however, stood her ground. "This is a family matter, not a public one," she said, "and it's being treated like treason." But for William, it wasn't just about family. It was about the institution. His tone remained composed, but firm. "It becomes public the moment it's said in front of foreign dignitaries." The call ended in under 10 minutes. No apology, no admission, just silence. Later that day, Camilla told a confidant that she believed her son was being made into a scapegoat. William's making a point and using Tom to make it sting. But from the Wales household, the response was clear. This wasn't personal. It was structural. One insider explained, William didn't expect Camilla to disown her son, but he did expect her to understand the seriousness of what happened. When she didn't, the fracture became permanent. In the days that followed, scheduling teams noticed subtle changes. Events that once included both households now began listing attendees separately. Shared calendar access was revoked. Coordination, once fluid, became formal. Even Charles, caught between loyalty and duty, grew quiet. Camilla had chosen to defend her son, but in doing so, she may have lost the trust of the future king. On July 23rd, the change became official. Without press coverage or fanfare, Tom Parker Bowles' name disappeared from the royal website's patronage directory, where he had once been listed under cultural and culinary representation. There was now a blank space. The British Culinary Guild, informed by a discreet letter from Kensington Palace, received a single-line statement: Mr. Parker Bowles will no longer serve in a formal capacity for the royal household. The language was neutral, but its meaning was unmistakable. For over a decade, Tom's position had granted him access, credibility, and proximity to royal influence. It was ceremonial, yes, but symbolically powerful. That power was now gone. Behind the scenes, more changes followed. His invitation to the upcoming Highgrove Harvest Banquet was quietly rescinded. A scheduled panel appearance at the 2025 Royal Food and Arts Exhibition in Edinburgh was cancelled without explanation. His name was removed from 2 internal guest lists, one of which had already gone to print. The palace wasn't making noise, said one insider. It was making corrections. No public statement was issued and none was expected. William's team had no interest in turning the moment into a media event. The message had already been sent and understood. Still, whispers reached the press within 48 hours. A few royal correspondents noted the changes online. By the next morning, headlines followed. Tom Parker Bowles quietly cut from royal rolls. Kensington makes its move after Birkhall incident. Tom himself made no comment. Sources close to him say he was caught off guard by the speed and finality of the decision. He had assumed the remark would fade, that it would be handled quietly, forgiven internally. But instead he found himself edged out without ceremony, without confrontation, and most notably, without a way back in. The monarchy had acted, and this time, it hadn't whispered. By July 24th, whispers inside the palace had begun to echo outside its walls. It started subtly: an altered webpage, a missing name, a cancellation from the Royal Food and Arts Exhibition. But royal watchers were quick to notice, and within hours the story broke. A well-sourced piece in the Telegraph confirmed what many had speculated. Tom Parker Bowles had been removed from his royal patronage following an inappropriate incident involving remarks made about King Charles at a private event. That was all it took. Social media lit up. Hashtags like Shart, Respect the King, Yasha, Tom Overstepped, and Crown First began trending in the UK and across Commonwealth countries. Within 24 hours, the sentiment was clear. This wasn't just a gaffe, it was a betrayal. You don't insult your own stepfather, let alone the king, and expect a free pass, one post read. By the next morning, the backlash had spread beyond palace watchers. A wine and dining magazine pulled an upcoming feature on Tom. A PR firm previously working on a food documentary quietly stepped back from promotion. A major culinary brand removed his name from a sponsorship deal, citing a scheduling conflict. Even longtime admirers in the press grew critical. There's a difference between being blunt and being corrosive, wrote one columnist. Tom forgot the line. Inside the palace, there was no move to defend him, no clarification, no spin. The silence from Clarence House was seen by many as confirmation. He was on his own. For Tom, the real sting wasn't the revoked title. It was the collapse of reputation. He had spent years carving out an identity separate from royal life. But when that identity was seen to disrespect the very institution he'd benefited from, the fallout was swift and brutal. And this time, the court of public opinion didn't need a royal decree. It issued its own. While headlines swirled and tensions mounted, King Charles did something uncharacteristic. He stepped back. On July 25th, the palace announced that the king would be postponing public engagements for the remainder of the week. No health issues were cited, no reason offered, but those within the royal household knew why. He was embarrassed, one advisor said, not just by the remark, but by the fact it came from someone tied so closely to his own wife. Behind palace walls, Charles was described as withdrawn. He canceled morning briefings, declined press proposals. Meals were taken in private. Even his daily walk, normally accompanied by a small security team, was moved to restricted areas of Windsor grounds to avoid cameras. He wasn't angry, said one longtime aide. He was quiet, like someone who'd had the wind knocked out of them. Privately, Charles had hoped to keep the matter contained. He reportedly told Camilla, "These things pass." But as public opinion turned sharply, and as William acted swiftly, the king's efforts to remain neutral began to look like detachment. Inside the palace, some aides grew frustrated with the silence. His Majesty believed that staying above it all was dignified, one staffer explained, but when the family is hurt from within, silence can seem like surrender. Adding to the pressure was Camilla's defense of her son. Her refusal to publicly acknowledge the damage only widened the emotional gap between her and Charles. According to one source, the king's response to her was limited to a single sentence. "You may not see the harm, but others do." In previous scandals, Charles had faced critics, press attacks, and political storms, but this one felt different. Because this wasn't public opinion turning on him, it was his own family turning on each other. And the crown he'd waited a lifetime to wear now sat uncomfortably, caught between loyalty to a son and to a wife. On the overcast morning of July 26th, Prince William arrived at Buckingham Palace without aides, press, or ceremony. His visit hadn't been scheduled on the public calendar, but the king had been expecting him. They met in the Queen's drawing room, a space once used by Queen Elizabeth II for some of the monarchy's most private decisions. This time, it was father and son, separated not just by generation, but by response. William placed a file on the table, neatly printed, clipped, and labeled. Incident 0417, breach of respect, internal summary. He spoke with the composure of a statesman, not a son. "This isn't about a single insult," he began. "It's about what we allow under this roof, what we let the crown absorb." Charles, seated quietly, listened. He knew the contents of the file, but this time he was hearing the full weight of its impact, from the man who would someday replace him. "If the institution doesn't defend itself," William continued, "then we send a message. That ridicule is survivable, that tradition bends to familiarity, and that blood excuses behavior. It doesn't." Charles finally spoke. "Tom made a mistake. He's not royal. He doesn't carry the same code." "And yet he dines at royal tables," William replied. "He speaks at royal events. He's seen by the world as part of us. When he mocks the king, it's not private, it's poison." There was no shouting, just a quiet collision of values. Charles had spent a lifetime trying to preserve unity. William now was defending legacy. He made no threats, issued no ultimatums, but his point was unshakable. "I didn't act to cause a divide," he said. "I acted to draw a line. The line you raised me to know." The king fell silent again. What followed was 40 minutes of conversation about duty, endurance, and the shifting shape of modern monarchy. William acknowledged the complexity, Camilla's role, public perception, personal pain, but his voice never faltered. "We can't lead if we won't draw boundaries. You taught me that loyalty is earned through service. That's what I'm doing." By the end of the meeting, Charles reportedly nodded once and looked toward the window. He didn't offer approval, he didn't object. But for William, that was enough, because in that quiet exchange, no decree, no headlines, a shift had taken place. William wasn't just the heir, he was now the defender of the crown, and the monarchy, for all its traditions, had just taken a modern stand. By the close of July 2025, the British monarchy had entered a new phase. Not with a crisis, but with a quiet, deliberate reset. There was no public declaration, no thunderous fallout, just small, measured movements that, together, signaled something much larger. A transition, not of power, but of control. It began internally. Royal aides noticed the shift first, not in tone, but in structure. Where once events were organized with joint oversight between Clarence House and Kensington Palace, the latter now took primary lead. Meetings were chaired by William's team. Press briefings were drafted in his voice. Senior diplomats and staff were instructed to defer final approvals to the office of the Prince of Wales. "It wasn't a coup," said one insider. "It was competence. Kensington showed it could steady the ship, so the ship turned toward it." Queen Camilla, though still holding her formal titles, saw her influence redefined. She was no longer listed on diplomatic itineraries. Her private engagements continued, but without the media promotion she once received. Her presence was now described in official language as supportive to the sovereign, a subtle but unmistakable demotion from her previously elevated status. Inside Clarence House, the tone had cooled. Longtime aides began to scale back public-facing roles. One senior planner, who had served the Queen Consort for over a decade, was quietly reassigned to a non-public project focused on heritage preservation. Another, responsible for external event coordination, moved to part-time advisory status. Camilla herself reportedly turned inward, spending long afternoons in the gardens of Mill House, limiting appearances to small charitable functions and family engagements. She wasn't exiled, sure, said one courtier, but she wasn't at the table anymore either. And then there was Tom Parker Bowles, the man at the center of it all. With no title to fall back on and no public defense from his mother, Tom faded from public life almost entirely. His column for a major food magazine was quietly paused, pending reassignment, and two sponsors severed ties before contracts even expired. Once known for witty commentary and insider access, he was now whispered about as a cautionary tale. He mistook proximity for immunity, a former palace advisor noted. He forgot that wearing the crown, even by extension, requires restraint. But it was Prince William who emerged most clearly from the storm. He didn't seek revenge. He didn't engage in drama. But what he made unmistakably clear, both inside the palace and to the public, was that the monarchy would no longer tolerate silent disrespect, especially from within its own circle. This wasn't personal, said a senior official from Kensington. It was cultural. He reasserted the monarchy's boundaries. Over the coming weeks, the changes became institutional. The Trooping the Color program was printed without Camilla's ceremonial title. A special royal exhibit in Edinburgh swapped her photograph for one of Catherine standing beside King Charles at a state dinner in 2024. A diplomatic handbook used by the Foreign Office listed the core four: Charles, William, Catherine, and Princess Anne. And most telling of all, the redesign of the Royal Household Organizational Chart, shared internally on August 1st. Camilla was listed not under working royals, but a newly defined category: spouse to the sovereign, honorary participation. She was no longer seen as part of the operating monarchy. She was present, but not empowered. For the world outside, the palace continued with grace and order. But behind the gilded walls, something fundamental had changed. Where once lineage guaranteed a seat, now character and loyalty defined one's place. William hadn't just defended the crown. He had clarified who it would, and would not, rest with in the years ahead. And in that clarity, the monarchy didn't fracture. It was reforged, quietly, deliberately, permanently. In the end, the monarchy didn't need to roar. It only needed to remember who it was. What began as a careless comment in a private room became a defining moment inside Britain's most guarded institution. Not because of the insult, but because of the response. Prince William didn't erupt. He acted, quietly, decisively, as a protector, not just of his father, but of the values the crown was meant to uphold. For King Charles, it was a sobering moment, a reminder that silence in the face of insult, even from family, can look like retreat. But in stepping back, he made space for something else, a new kind of leadership. Camilla, once central to the royal stage, found herself gently but unmistakably sidelined, not because of one scandal, but because of a pattern of protection that the monarchy could no longer justify. And her son, Tom Parker Bowles, learned the hard way that titles may be inherited, but respect is earned. Through it all, the public watched, and in that silence they chose. Not tradition for tradition's sake, but character over comfort, duty over drama, substance over status. And at the center of that choice stood William and Catherine, not just as heirs, but as anchors. This wasn't just a scandal survived, it was a standard reset. Because in 2025, the crown isn't defended by blood alone. It's defended by those who understand the weight of wearing it. And now more than ever, that weight is in the right hands.